the newsagents.
Sur l'essentiel, plus de justice sociale et plus de justice environnementale.
Mais ne tombez pas toutes les deux dessus parce que j'ai le malheur de vous faire...
Don't panic. There is a whole world of chaos still to come, whilst we have turned into this temporary, perhaps, oasis of calm and seriousness. Over the channel, it's all kicking off.
Yeah, that's the sound of a French TV election studio last night, where it was... C'est complètement fou là-bas. I mean, the disorganisation, the chaos in France now following the second round of voting, which has seen Marine Le Pen's far-right party reduced to third place. But what happens next? How they form a government, God only knows. Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily, and we are back in Newsagents HQ. Calm, do we think?
Calm.
Well slept?
You said on the final Q&A about how would you get through the night, and you said I was going to have a martini cocktail in the studio when we record. Instead of which, you're wearing martini cocktail earrings, I see.
Yes. I still haven't had my dirty vodka martini.
Not yet.
No. I just had this splitting headache for 48 hours. And then I went home and I thought, right, now is my time. And the dog, my poor dog Moody, is up every night. If we have any dog whisperers, my dog Moody has started barking throughout the night at some imaginary poltergeist in our attic.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
What happens if Moody doesn't desist in this behaviour?
I think I might have to move out.
So Moody. So maybe this is clever on Moody's part. He's just trying to take over your house and force you out.
He is. I mean, he has become the dominant character in the entire house. We're all terrified of him now.
I wonder whether Labour, as part of its 6 missions, has got a plan for what to do about Moody.
Yes.
It needs a 7th mission.
Dog poltergeist.
Yeah.
So where are we this morning? Well, I think we've sort of swapped places, haven't we, with the rest of Europe? We were going through all our Brexit chaos, all our noise, all our division, all our toxicity. And over the weekend, we have seen this sort of very steady implementation of order. Everyone in the cabinet is just gone off to do their own jobs now. Rachel Reeves is talking about planning.
And we'll talk a bit more about that later on in the episode.
Wes Streeting is talking about dentists. Keir Starmer's going round the United Kingdom, all 4 nations. And over in France, it is all kicking off. Because what happened last night came as a real shock. And this is a country who's already sort of shocked itself to death in the last month or so, after that snap election was called by Emmanuel Macron. And last night we saw the party that he most feared, the Rassemblement National, the party of Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, coming in third when the exit polls closed. And for a moment there was unbridled joy on behalf of Macron, the centrist, that this was all going to be fine again, until they realised that they'd essentially just transposed one set of problems for another set of problems, because the characters that are now emerging as the real winners in France from last night is the hard radical left, particularly this character Melenchon, who is somebody who I guess combines the sort of populist left with very, very anti-monetary policies in France, and that's got everyone worrying now about what that looks like.
And of course these results, were in sharp contrast to the first round results, where everyone thought, oh my God, the Rassemblement National, the RN, the far right, could be in power in the National Assembly and having their Prime Minister kind of in charge of legislation, and Macron just a total lame duck president.
Yeah, I mean, after they won the first round last week when you were in Paris, there was a regrouping of sorts. And the centrists under Macron and the left under a whole variety of sort of leftist socialist figures said, OK, we cannot let the hard right win. We are going to stand down candidates in places where they do not look like they'll do well to allow the centrists through. So essentially, there was this kind of pact, very loose pact, which allowed for the left and for the centre to win over the right. So in that respect, this result shouldn't be that much of a shock. We often see, as I think we talked about on Sunday, France doing this. They go right up to the edge of sort of bringing something that looks like fascism into power, and then they back off. The first round of the election is when they go, I'm going to vote with my heart because I'm so angry, I hate the lot of you. And the second round is where they go, okay, no, not them. So in a way, we shouldn't be that surprised. But I think what this has shown up, and there's this wonderful phrase they're using in France this morning, which is la brouillard reste épaissée, that there is such thick fog around everything, is now those on the left who've done this slightly shady deal with Macron are saying, what do we get? Does Melenchon then say, I helped you, Macron's party is now in second place, could have been worse, what do I get? Do we get to establish who the Prime Minister is? Right?
Just on your point about people standing back from the edge,
Yeah.
when I was Paris correspondent in 2002, and it was
I was
the
there that
playoff,
night.
and it was
Jean-Marie Le Pen and
versus Chirac.
Yeah.
The French people went to vote, some of them with rubber gloves on, because they were going to vote for Chirac, even though they hated Chirac, and some of them vote with clothes pegs on their nose to say, I can't stand the smell of having to vote for Chirac, but I know what I've got to do. And that is what the French did in 2002. To a lesser extent, they did it last night.
Yeah.
But what about in 27, when the next presidential election? The Front National, or the RN, has just gone up and up and up since then. They are a real threat to what the future of the French Republic looks like.
Yeah, and I think when Macron first called that election, there were some sort of tea leaf readers who were suggesting that he was essentially looking at the presidential elections of 2027. Macron, as we know, is safe until then. Nothing can remove the president. But this parliamentary election he was calling was, some believed, to get the hard right, the Front National, in power, to allow people to see what they actually did if they got power. A bit like saying, come on then, Farage, come on, reform. You want to be in charge of immigration? Let's see. Come and have a go. So from that perspective, maybe this hasn't worked. And Marine Le Pen has come straight out the trap saying, we haven't been stopped. We've just been delayed. Is it like the tidal wave that has just pulled back more sharply in order to hit again with more force in 2027? We don't actually know the answer to that at the moment. I think Macron could argue that his gamble, for now, paid off because he's kept the one party that he had his eye on out of power.
But it's left a bit of chaos.
Yeah.
Well, let's speak now to Angela Diffley. She is one of France 24's main presenters and an old colleague of mine from many, many years ago. Angela, good to have you with us. So where are we now?
Where are we now? Gabriel Attal, the Prime Minister, has just handed in his resignation. It has been refused by Macron, who said, can you stay on and be a caretaker Prime Minister? There are the Olympics coming up, and generally to halt any instability. Attal himself gave a speech last night, which was very conciliatory compared to many of the others, and said, I'll carry on my duties as long as I'm asked to. So that's where we are now. In terms of what government might be formed, it is still chaos. It is looking as though something centre-left might emerge from this. Macron would like to keep the far left, La France Insoumise, the France Unbowed, way out of government, and equally, of course, the far-right National Rally. And the hope is that within that big left bloc that won last night, the biggest element was this far-left component, but the second biggest bloc, and much closer to it than was expected, were the mainstream socialists. So it's expected that Macron would like some sort of centrist coalition with the socialists. Of course, this depends on everybody's huge egos. There will be a lot of horse trading as to whether the socialists would want to. It depends on the programme, what they would give up, what they would insist on holding. And, Macron has lost his relative majority and has a lot less power to call the shots, really. There is a scenario, which is perfectly possible, whereby the socialists and the centrists will get together and former President François Hollande might be the person chosen to be Prime Minister, which would be extremely weird.
Angela, just talk to us a bit about Mélenchon, because he is the character who, for some, could really say emerged the winner of last night. This very hard left character. And he's somebody who many of the parties have just frankly refused to work with. But presumably He stood down some of his people. You know, he allowed Macron and the left to sort of forge this bloc. He's going to want his pound of flesh now, isn't he?
He would like to, and he is a consummate political operator. He was the first person at 8 o'clock to make a speech, and he made a very epic, dramatic speech, poetry, always very lyrical. He's a terrific speaker, and he has this style. He revels in addressing crowds, but he is extremely polarizing and divisive.
Who would you compare him to in on a sort of in a UK
Bernie
sphere?
Sanders
Is he a Corbyn? Is he a Galloway? Is he a who does he remind you of, if anyone?
Slightly Bernie Sanders in the US. He's a Corbyn in terms of his ideas, but he's a much more extrovert character. He really loves the centre stage, a very, very big ego. You know, yes, I suppose some kind of a mix between Corbyn and Galloway. But, you know, he is extremely divisive. He's also ruthless. He, you know, conducted a purge within his own party and basically refused to endorse people with whom he had personal gripes. They went on to win, standing, you know, independently of him. But he's quite despotic, I mean, is a word often used within the party about his style. I mean, in terms of his policy, it's quite interesting because he started off as a mainstream socialist. He's been on quite a journey. And he used to be a big defender in France of laïcité, you know, the idea of keeping religion out of public life. And he has become now a fervent supporter of all kinds of identity politics and the Muslims' right to dress as they wish. He's made a complete 180-degree turn on that. So he's changed politically a lot as well.
And Angela, on that, I mean, I was reading over the weekend, the unease among France's Jewish community, which is the biggest, I think, in Europe, about someone like Melenchon with his hands on power, with his strongly anti-Zionist, but also some would say anti-Semitic attitudes.
Yeah, the Jewish community in France, most of them did express real concern about elements within the far left. There was someone in this bloc, he actually lost his seat last night, but there was someone in the bloc who said on October the 8th that he endorsed Hamas and the methods it might choose to resist. This was on October the 8th. It got very ugly in the second week of the campaign. A 12-year-old Jewish girl was raped by 12 and 13-year-old boys who hurled anti-Semitic insults. It was deeply shocking.
And Angela, could he be Prime Minister? Is there a world in which Mélenchon himself becomes the next Prime Minister?
I think it's extremely unlikely because I think it would just simply not wash. There would be uproar. He has a solid core of supporters who think he's great, but even most moderates are really, really fearful of him, and people who don't share his views would be outraged. I simply can't see that happening. You know, he's a flowery character, and every time this happens, you know, will Mélenchon be Prime Minister? And it never does. And I think there'd be a lot of resistance on the left, even within his own party.
And Angela, I just want to, let's go the other side of the political spectrum now to the Rassemblement National, the RN. Marine Le Pen is not going to be putting in Bardella as the next Prime Minister. Where does it leave them in terms of the 27 presidential election? Because, yeah, they suffered a defeat, but they have got a hell of a lot of seats in Parliament now. They have got a platform on which to build, presumably, for the presidential election. Or have they reached their peak?
Yes and no, because they don't seem to have much of a reserve of votes. But that said, the areas in which they are seen to do well are still the top priorities, according to polls of the French. And cost of living is a priority for everyone, but that goes across the parties. But the other two top priorities are a real problem with crime and law and order on the streets, and a concern about immigration needs curbing, integration isn't working, France's rules on secularity are being eroded. And both of those two subjects are still very high on the list of priorities about what people worry about in France.
So, Angela, if you had to go back to the beginning, Macron takes this massive gamble. Everyone, including his own Prime Minister, thinks he's batshit crazy. Would he be thinking this morning, that paid off because I've kept the right at bay, or I've just opened another can of worms?
It certainly isn't as bad as everyone feared. And he hasn't done well. He has lost a relative majority and now will have to cobble together a reasonable second place centrist party with whoever will go in with them. But it's so unclear, what will any programme look like in terms of a budget, public services, in terms of the retirement age, which he pushed through against massive opposition. Is that going to go out the window now? Law and order, policing policy as well, which is a huge issue here, and immigration. What would any government look like? And he also has really irked the population. Everybody found this experience so traumatic. And already he was considered, a lot of people see him as someone who has a bit of a superiority complex. He's not well liked out in the countryside, and that has only multiplied. Candidates didn't want his photo on their leaflets when they went round campaigning. The guy who has emerged from this well is the Prime Minister who's just handed in his resignation and had it refused, Gabriel Attal. Yes, who kind of single-handedly clawed this thing back and made it so that the centrist party came second and not way down the list.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Thank you so much. I know Angela is now running off to actually
Go back
present
on
to
air.
the nation. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
You're so welcome.
Bye-bye. We've also got a new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who's on a whistle-stop tour of European capitals at the moment. And presumably it will include France, trying to reset our relations with France, which is absolutely critical in terms of the whole small boat agenda, let alone relations with the EU.
Look, I'm not saying this will last, but I think you felt it when Keir Starmer did that call with Biden. Normally, it's the UK that is desperate to talk to America. This time round, I thought that Biden was actually getting as much from the call with Starmer. As he mentioned the special relationship first, it was kind of like they are looking for bastions of centrist calm. And I think Lammy going off and doing first Germany, and then he went to, where did he
Sweden.
go next? Sweden. He's kind of doing we've got this. We're going to be calm about this. We're going to reset. But nobody is mentioning Brexit. And they're not even mentioning the Erasmus deal because they don't particularly want to spend money. I don't think that it requires to rejoin. They're definitely not going to do freedom of movement. So David Lammy's got a T-shirt on essentially saying, This is not about Brexit. This is about calmness. This is not about Brexit.
No, I think his T-shirt is saying, I'm sorry to disagree with you
Go on.
over the slogan on his T-shirt. I think it is, we're talking about Brexit, but don't ask us to do anything institutional. We want to love you. We want to be as close as we can.
It's a love bomb, not a policy.
Exactly. But don't ask us about customs union. Don't ask us about free movement. Don't ask us about single market.
Obviously, he's wearing a really nice suit.
We'll be back after the break with Labour and the challenge of getting more houses built in Britain.
I have repeatedly warned that whoever won the general election would inherit the worst set of circumstances since the Second World War. What I have seen in the past 72 hours has only confirmed that. Our economy has been held back by decisions deferred and decisions ducked. Political self-interest put ahead of the national interest. A government that put party first and country second. We face the legacy of 14 years of chaos and economic irresponsibility. That is why, over the weekend, I instructed Treasury officials to provide an assessment of the state of our spending inheritance.
So Rachel Reeves, in her first speech as Chancellor at the Treasury, yes, setting out some political blame, but actually much more interested in putting onto the front foot what Labour intends to do to turn things around, and in particular to building more houses to deal with the acute crisis that there is in that sector of the economy where so many people are priced out of the market, can't afford rents, and it is genuinely a crisis. And the ambition is 1.5 million new homes in the next 5 years of a Labour government.
So how does this happen? Well, it all hinges on what Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves are calling the grey belt. In other words, we're not going to come and build on your fields. We know the cities are already, filled to capacity, but the grey belts are what they're calling the ugly parts of the green belt. In other words, old petrol stations, disused car parks, the sort of run-down bits that are halfway between the urban sprawl and the actual countryside. And they're saying that that should be the prime areas for development. And they want to build, this is their target, 1.5 million homes in the next 5 years. They don't get to build those homes unless they massively reform the speed and the flexibility of our planning laws. In other words, you can't just push back and push back and push back by talking to councils and lawyers and putting hurdles in the way of things happening. You just have to say, yes, you can get on and do it.
Look, the word NIMBYism, which has been around for years, not in my backyard, is going to be making a comeback in the English language, because when you are trying to build that much so quickly, you're going to find protest. You're going to find people who are saying, I don't want it, we don't want it, our community doesn't need it. This is going to despoil the countryside and ruin our green belt, and the beautiful land of England will be forever sullied by this.
And when Labour's constituent parts were basically in inner cities, in London, in Manchester, in Liverpool, in Glasgow, then that was fine, right? Because they already had...
Because who cares? Who cares whether you're fed up in Surrey or
exactly.
Hampshire
They could
wherever.
point to Surrey and say, we'd like to build on there, thanks very much. And it was Michael Gove's problem or Jeremy Hunt's problem. Now, Labour has stretched its tentacles into parts of this country that are shires, quite frankly. They are in Norfolk, they are in Suffolk, they are in parts of the south coast, they are in areas right across England and Scotland and Wales where people have previously till now tried to protect, places of national interest. So will those new MPs succumb to what their constituents may be feeling right now, which is, I know we want housing, but not here? Or will those MPs follow the party line and say, sorry, mate, we've got to, here's the bulldozer, get out of the way? Well,
I think that actually what will happen is that you will get Labour MPs saying, oh, not here, please, if you wouldn't mind, and Rachel Reeves saying tough. Yeah. I think that Labour know that these constituencies in Hampshire, in Norfolk, in wherever, are on loan.
Borrowed time.
They're on borrowed time. We're not going to build our election success on just caring about those constituencies. And if the imperative is to achieve this, so you are dealing with the housing crisis, you need to get on with that quickly. You need to get the investment from the private sector involved. Therefore, you need commitments that this building work will actually happen and that the planning laws will not stop it. Yeah. And therefore, you will have them, those MPs, I'm sorry to say it, they won't be that powerful.
We're joined now by Vicky Spratt, a housing journalist, a housing expert, somebody who has been studying the Reeves policy, but also can explain to us a little bit how we got here in the first place. So, Vicky, just talk us through what we've heard from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, this morning, because planning is right at the centre of what they say will bring growth back to this country.
Absolutely, Emily. So the new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has set out her plan to get Britain building this 1.5 million new homes that Labour have promised by the end of the first 5-year term in government. And to do that, she is signalling to investors that Britain is a great place to invest and they are going to need private funding to get some of these homes built. But to deliver them, they have to reform the planning system. And I think what Labour are setting out here is at once incredibly ambitious. That number, 1.5 million, is huge. Conservative governments over the last decade have not hit their own target of 300,000 homes a year. So it's going to be no mean feat to get up there. But the delivery requires planning reform. And that's what she's been setting out today. Several things, not all of which will be popular, that will get those homes built. So reclassifying low value bits of the green belt as grey belt, pushing ahead brownfield sites and bringing back housing targets. Although what I'm still not clear on is what exactly the targets will be at a local level. And I think that's still being decided. We've got this big 1.5 million figure. Right. But how many a year?
Okay, because
where will they go?
Labour is suddenly in a position where it's not just winning metropolitan urban seats with presumably lots of the sort of, grey areas, whether it's old garages or sort of ex-parking lots or whatever. It's suddenly in places with huge swathes of actual green countryside. I mean, do we know how far the plans are in terms of taking it into people's back gardens, into the places where some of their new constituents will not want it?
Well, I think this is a really interesting question because there is this sort of idea that people don't want homes built in their area, and that was certainly a reason why former Housing Secretary Michael Gove's very ambitious planning reforms, which by the way were quite similar to what Labour are proposing, could not get over the line because backbenchers were worried about what it might mean for their chances at the election we just had. But I don't think this means building in people's gardens. I don't think it means concreting over the greenbelt. Quite a high percentage of greenbelt land is actually low value. So I do think it's smart to reclassify that as grey belt, which is what Labour is saying, and push ahead on development. But the key really will be, let's take a place like Hitchin, for instance, that Labour won on Friday from former Secretary to the Treasury, Tory MP Bir Mafalami, who's no longer an MP. That is a place where lots of people who can't afford to live in London have moved out. They might commute back into the city, but there is lots of greenbelt there. So people who've lived there a long time might be worried about development, but the truth is the homes are really urgently needed in reach of London. That's true in the north of England too, with Manchester and with Leeds. So there will be some convincing of local people that needs to be done, but at the same time, I do think the land is there. But the crucial thing really will be infrastructure, and this is another key part of what Labour have been talking about. They are going to announce their new towns over the next couple of months. Where they'll be, we don't yet know. But if they're going to build new homes, they have to put infrastructure in to support them. And I think if new housing comes with infrastructure, what the polling shows is that people tend to be more supportive of it. So they have to take a 360 view of this, which they're signalling they will. Then they're saying we're not just going to put homes here, there, and everywhere. Local communities will still have a say, but they're going to have to be really careful, particularly in those seats that they've won from.
And infrastructure takes money, right? I mean, that's
well,
the
that's
point.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, you don't just get a train service without spending, without borrowing.
And also, this isn't like the kind of 1950s of the nation fit for heroes that was being built, of the great council estates, which was, public money that was being... They want the private sector to be the key partners in this, don't they?
It's a bit of a misconception about those new towns of the post-war years because private money was involved. There was a lot of public money, but private investment did come into it too. So Labour will still have the Affordable Homes Programme funding and they will have private investment. If they could bring those two together, I think this is absolutely doable. But obviously we have to wait and see whether they can do that. But there's something else that I would say here that is not being talked about today, and I really wish it was. How many homes in this 1.5 million figure in these new towns are going to be truly affordable social homes? Because those new towns you just mentioned, John, that big house building drive we had in the post-war years that got us up to that 300,000 a year figure, by the way, at points, most of the homes being delivered were council homes. So to do this, it's not just about homes, it's about who's going to live in them. And we are at a really, really difficult moment for our economy and our housing market, where house prices remain at historic highs. Interest rates have doubled in the last 3 years. They might have stabilised, but they've still doubled, they've jumped up. So if you build new homes for private sale, I'm not sure how many first-time buyers or even people like me who might want to move from a one-bed flat to a 2 or 3 bedroom house will actually be able to afford to buy them.
But presumably the thinking is that if you have built 1.5 million new homes, there is much more supply. And according to laws of supply and demand, that if you do your basic A-level economics, is that prices will come down.
Well, you're going to get me cancelled because every time I talk about this issue, it really, really whips up such a debate. You would think that is how supply and demand would work with housing. But look at Help to Buy. When David Cameron's government brought in Help to Buy, and they did get some new homes onto the market and they were available to first-time buyers, house prices did not come down. I do not think housing works like other assets. And I was speaking to a brilliant economist the other week, Dame Kate Barker. She authored the seminal housing review when Tony Blair was Prime Minister. And I asked her about this. I said, do you think if Labour build 1.5 million new homes, that homes will be cheaper. And she said, I don't think that's how it's going to work. If you think about the iPhone, when Apple started suddenly making more iPhones, which is a luxury product, iPhones didn't get cheaper. So I don't know if house prices will fall. They might not rise dramatically, but I think we have to be very careful about this idea that flooding the market with new supply will mean that the value of homes suddenly drops. It might. I could be wrong. Dame Kate Barker could be wrong. But I think that's actually going to be one of the biggest issues that Labour face, because what we know about housing is that it doesn't seem to function in the way that the other products or assets do.
And what about the targets, just finally? I mean, we had targets, and then I think, didn't Liz Truss end them when in her brief glorious period as Prime Minister?
She did, and I'm quoting from something she wrote for The Telegraph, said they were Stalinist. And that was a really, really, really big problem that the Conservatives had, because after that happened, I spoke to lots of investors, not just investors who want to build homes for private sale, by the way, investors who want to be involved in building social housing and work with local government. And they said, without housing targets, why would we put our money in British housing? Because we don't know that the homes are going to get built, delivered, or sold or used for social housing. You need the targets for investor confidence. So I think it's really smart of Labour to bring the target back. But what I'm still not clear on is exactly how those targets are going to work. And I'm assuming that will all become clear when their reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework are fleshed out in the days and weeks ahead. But I think targets, contrary to what Liz Truss implied, are actually good for investors and good for market confidence.
Vicky, thank you so much for explaining it so brilliantly.
Really
Great
helpful.
to have you with us.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Bye.
There are, as you know, 650 MPs in the House of Commons. But this time round, about half of them will be brand new. I mean, it's, imagine teacher, first day of school, having to learn your class. And then imagine if you are one of those MPs trying to learn literally half the House's name.
You've just triggered me. My first day at school, when I was 11, I had come from a different borough. And so I went into my classroom late, and the teacher said to Mrs. Wilkins, said to me, "What's your name?" And I said, "Jonathan." "No, your surname," she said. I said, "Sopel." She said, "Sopel, go and sit over there." And I thought, I haven't been spoken to like that. And I was so absolutely intimidated. Yeah. But in the House of Commons, you're going to have Lindsay Hoyle saying, "Yeah, you, the bloke with the blue tie. Yeah, not you, the one with the green jacket on," because he's not going to have a clue who half these people are. It's going to be a degree of chaos of trying to figure your...
Doesn't he just say, take the honourable member for blah, blah, blah?
Yes, but if he's taking questions that because a hand has gone up or there's someone stood up in the Commons, when you're choosing who you want to bring in.
Oh, God, that's a cognitive test and a half, isn't
it? Yeah,
it?
exactly.
I mean,
I think Joe Biden and Donald Trump should have to undergo that test of being the speaker for a week.
We were speaking to somebody, one of our producers was speaking to somebody, fairly high up in the Lib Dems, and talk about unintended consequences. And, this is obviously the best possible problem the Lib Dems could have. But 72 MPs from 11, they don't know who half them are. I mean, I bet I could walk in there and go, I'm the new
MP. Also, the policeman.
Moody could go in there.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to these names, right? We will be watching PMQs on Wednesday for you, she said. And we won't know who anyone is. We'll be doing the same thing.
We will indeed. But for the policeman going on the door, how do you salute somebody, or do you think, oh my God, you're just a student, get out of here? No, I'm the new MP for Cambridge Northwest or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. There are going to be all sorts of faces, all sorts of people who you have no idea who they are, what they are. And it's going to be a very strange moment.
Also just the shape of it. I mean, we don't have the fan shape of, a sort of a PR system. But we will now have Labour maybe spreading across two benches, the Lib Dems, who might have to be at the end of one Labour bench with the 112 Tories, but with, do the Reform sit next to the Indies? The little SNPers, there's only 9 of them now.
I know. It's going to be a very strange constellation in the Commons chamber on the opposition benches, because you are going to see that the Tory benches are pretty threadbare.
Yeah, that's on Wednesday. Before that, we are at PopCon tomorrow, the popcorn of political Conservatives, where we imagine that without ever saying it explicitly, they will be looking at potential leadership candidates for the Conservative Party and talking about the direction of the party. We think that they've deleted their Twitter.
There's apparently a technical gremlin.
OK, fine.
It's not the end of days. But at PopCon, we have previously seen Jacob Rees-Mogg,
Yeah.
ex-MP,
Yeah.
Liz Truss, ex-MP. Who is the centre point? Who is the rallying person around PopCon now?
David Frost, I think.
Lord Frost, who's also not in the House of Commons.
No.
Interesting times. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.